evening and welcome to our SDG-Hub run by the Center for Sustainable Transformation, CeST, here on Asaase Radio. I'm your host, Kevin Annan, and I'm here with my colleague from CeST and my co-host, Rosemary Balami, from the Young Reporters for the Environment's Ghana program. On today's episode, it is coined Understanding the Carbon Markets, a partial solution to address climate change. After the recent Climate Action Summit in Kenya, a key solution that was discussed was the carbon market. This is a mechanism designed to reduce gas emissions and mitigate climate change. Tonight we are going to dive in deep and try to understand the concept and the possible outcomes of carbon markets. We'll also unravel the complexities and explore the incredible potentials that carbon markets hold for the planet.
Carbon markets is not a new concept. The carbon markets began in the early 1990s with the adoption of the United Nations, Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992. This, however, showcases international efforts to combat climate change, promote sustainable development, and, create a global market for emissions reduction. Although this concept has been in existence for quite some time now, here in Ghana, we have not had regulations in place to control concessions and revenue. There is also a lack of a common understanding on how, this works, and a lot of people may even wonder how possible this is. But, that's why we are going to have this conversation today, to possibly provide all the necessary insight on the carbon market. But before we delve into the conversation, Young Reporters for the Environment Ghana took to the streets to ask the public what they know about the carbon markets. Let's hear what they have to say.
This is my first time hearing this. This is my first time, honestly. I've never heard the name. What was the name again?
Bond trading.
No, this is my first time hearing it. Honestly, unless you tell me about it.
No, please. I've not heard about it.
Okay, what do you think it will be about?
It will be about global something, I don't know.
Okay, what do you know about carbon trading? Have you heard about it?
Carbon trading? No, I have no idea about carbon trading.
All right. Those are some of the views from the public on whether or not they know anything about the carbon market. Now, to provide insight to the topic today, we have an expert here with us. He's going to help us better understand the carbon market and explore its potential while we are trying to create a greener and a cleaner future for ourselves here in Ghana and abroad. We have in the studio with us Mr. Daniel Akwetey Lamptey. He's a Principal Program Officer at the Climate Change Unit at the Environmental Protection Agency. Welcome, sir. We are happy to have you on here. For starters, we would like you to tell us briefly about yourself and what you do.
Okay, as Riley said, I'm Daniel Akwetey Lamptey, and I work for the Climate Change Unit of EPA, and I'm involved in climate reporting as well as low carbon development and carbon markets.
Okay.
So we truly have an expert in here with us.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah, okay. So we'll start our conversation by talking briefly about what carbon markets are, what exactly carbon markets are, and everything that we need to know for someone who doesn't understand what it is.
Okay, before I dive deep into your question, I would like to also say hello to your listeners and then also provide the compliments of the Executive Director of the EPA, on whose stead we're here anyway. So to deep dive into what carbon markets are, just as we have trade around cocoa, this market trades in carbon. And when we talk about carbon, we are looking at greenhouse gas emissions or greenhouse gases, right? And it looks at sulfur dioxide, methane, and these are gases that in their own nature are able to trap heat and release it over time. They exist already in the atmosphere, but their presence is not the problem. The problem now is that the volumes based on human activities is what we are concerned with now. And that is how come we're experiencing global warming. So this trade is around greenhouse gases, but all of these things are expressed in carbon dioxide equivalent. Okay. And so you hear carbon, it does not mean it's necessarily only carbon dioxide, but it refers to a broader spectrum of all the greenhouse gases.
Okay, so the whole issue is the fact that human activity has caused carbon dioxide to rise.
Yes.
In the temperature.
Okay. Great.
Am I right about that?
Oh, you're great. You're right about that.
Okay. And there's also one concept called carbon credits. I'd like you to connect how carbon credits and carbon markets relate with each other.
Okay. So just as I'll pick up from where I left off. So carbon markets is necessarily used to transition or to help achieve a low carbon development. And how do you do that? So you place a price on emissions, you place a price on carbon, and that price provides an incentive for businesses and for individuals to avoid emissions. And that is to also say that you're looking at issues around the social cost, or the issues around addressing the impact of climate change, like flooding or sea rise levels. So you're looking at the market that, or coming up with a pricing instrument that will force people to move towards a low carbon transition. And I want to provide an example here. So, for example, let's take something that we're all familiar with, and let's say coal pot, or the traditional three firestone.
Yeah.
Right? These are inefficient systems, and when you use such systems, you use lots of wood, and they are not designed in a way to ensure thermal efficiency and ensure that you're able to cook with lower amount of fuel. So you can introduce what we call efficient or improved cook stoves. And these improved cook stoves have been designed in a way to ensure that thermal efficiency, and they use less amount of fuel, right, or fuel wood or charcoal, right? So how do you achieve that transition? So there's a concept around methods and standards. There are methods and standards for estimating the carbon footprint associated with an activity. So you must first estimate the emission or the carbon footprint of each of the activities. And so, as I said, let's represent the emissions of an improved cook stove as 2, and let's represent the emissions associated with using an unimproved system as 10. So you able to strike the difference and have a savings of 8. So that savings of 8 must go through a certain process to become a carbon asset or to become a carbon credit. And the process is that, 1, you must have a system to measure it, and I've already spoken about the standards that we use. And then also you must also have, it must be real, meaning that it should have happened. And again, it must also be additional, meaning that the carbon revenues is what will make the transition happen, or the activity happen. And again, you must verify it, and the third-party auditor must come to verify that indeed this has happened and has occurred. And then you have that volume, that savings, and that savings is then priced and becomes an asset. So that's how you get a carbon asset.
It sounds like a lot. Doesn't it sound a bit complex to you?
Okay, it's not anyway, but
it's not a very complex.
Do you want to break it down further? I can still deep dive into
would appreciate that.
Would appreciate you if you could break it down further, because the whole idea is to try to get people to understand it better. And so you can elaborate more on what you just said.
Okay, so in terms of creating a carbon asset, right, you can either achieve emission reductions from, or if I say emission reduction, you can either remove greenhouse gases, avoid and reduce emissions of greenhouse gases, right? And you can only do that through 2 basic approaches. So the first one is that you could either use a technology, or you could either use a nature-based solution. So in terms of technology, there are various examples. So we have what that would be too technical. So let's use a simple one that you would understand. So you could either displace fossil fuels such as petrol, diesel with renewable energy such as solar, wind, right? And that ensures that you have avoided emissions. And so that is the benchmark that you compare what would have happened or initially. So, for example, if you introduce solar PV systems, you would then compare it to the fossil fuel system, right? And you then strike the difference to be able to come up with the savings.
Okay, I have another question. So I've heard loosely about people leaving behind a huge carbon footprint, right? Especially very wealthy people who have jets and so on and so forth. Is this carbon market or carbon credit a way to make them pay for it?
Okay, thank you. So if I understand you correctly, you're asking how do we force people to be responsible for their emissions?
Yes.
So then there are various ways through which that can happen. The most common one, or the predominant one, is the compliance type, or where you come up with a carbon pricing instrument that is compliance in nature. And if you talk about carbon pricing instruments, you're looking at a carbon tax. You're looking at also an emission trading scheme, or what we call a cap and trade system. And if you say compliance market, we are looking at a highly regulated market that is either linked to a jurisdiction or is linked to an association. And so an example is that the airline industry has got a carbon system that is known as the carbon offsetting reduction strategy for international aviation, because planes land and take off from different boundaries, so no one accounts for it. So how do you ensure that emission reductions happen from there? So they have also got they also have their own obligations, and so in doing so, you either adopt a carbon tax or an emission trading scheme, and I will explain how those things help in reducing emissions. So a carbon tax is simply coming up with your carbon footprint. So let's take you, Kevin. If carbon footprint is 10, and the government simply applies a rate of, let's say, $10 or 10 cedis per ton of emission, or per ton of carbon dioxide that you emit, and that is then multiplied to get your carbon tax. So here 10 by 10, and you get 100 cedis or $100, and that becomes your carbon tax.
Okay, so it means that I have to pay, the more carbon I emit, the more I pay.
Yes, and so that becomes a way to an incentive to force you to really
reduce
your emissions.
Okay. And
then the cap and trade system is where, or the emission trading scheme is, as the name suggests, a cap. So there's always a regulator. The regulator or the government will come, or let's say the region. So let's say EU comes up with a cap or a ceiling that no entity or no company within that jurisdiction should exceed its emissions. So that cap will be, let's say, 10, right? And as I have said, that 10 becomes the cap.
Okay.
Now, how do we ensure trading among them? And this, as part of the cap, the regulator would now apportion various portions to you as an entity in there. So either, Kevin, you have 8, you have 6, I have like 4, right? And so I must not exceed 10. So at the end of the year, if my emissions exceed 10, then I must either acquire an offset to meet or to bring my emission footprint down, or to negate or to neutralize my emissions and then stay within the cap. Or I can buy from Kevin, where Kevin has maybe a surplus because he could not exceed the target, then he would come in there. And so that is the emission trading scheme.
Yeah, I think that you've covered quite a lot when it comes to the carbon market. You've spoken about the prices and so on. We'll come to other parts concerning the carbon markets. But one thing I want us to talk about is, are there any terms and conditions, any laws that govern carbon taxation? Briefly.
Okay, carbon taxation, or you look
at the carbon market, carbon credits taxation.
Okay.
Particularly here in Ghana.
Okay, great. That's an important question, Kevin. So, in 2005, governments met in Paris, depending on where you come from. So there was a landmark agreement that was reached in 2016 about 196 countries, and that landmark agreement is the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement sets an objective that we want to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, right? How can governments achieve that? The only way governments can achieve that is the implementation of action, and that we call as nationally determined contribution, or simply called NDC, not a political party. So the NDC simply is a compendium of activities that each country or each party communicates to the world on how it intends to avoid, reduce, and cut its emissions, right? So that document in there provides a foundation for the emerging market. And Article 6 of that same agreement provides 3 various streams to help achieve the NDCs. So the first 2 are called the market approaches, because they deal in carbon assets. Right? So the first one is called cooperative approaches, and that allows countries to trade among themselves emissions in relation to their NDC. So on the back of that, I must say that government of Ghana was the first to come up with a framework agreement
globally,
yes. Wow. Come up with a framework on carbon markets.
Nice.
And that framework is called Ghana's framework for international markets and on-market. And that agreement was approved by Cabinet and adored last year by the Minister for Environment, responsible for the environment. And I must say that that has created the needed attention on Ghana for carbon assets. And so I also want to use this medium to call any green business, any project developer that is struggling to raise revenue. So far as you are implementing any activity that has to do with removal, avoidance, and reduction of GHG emissions, you can provide us a concept note. We're happy to help you matchmake you with a potential investor that can help you implement your project. And so thank you for the question.
Interesting initiative right there by the Ghana government. So now again about the carbon, are there any key players in the carbon market, and what do roles and what does the role of governments and corporations play in this regard? Okay, great.
There are a lot of actors in the carbon market space. The first one I would want to talk about is our government. So we have the host party government or the acquiring party government. So the host party government, in this case Ghana, where all mitigation activities or all projects happen in Ghana, and so we will be the host country. Again, we have acquiring countries. So the government of Switzerland, the government of Sweden, the government of Singapore, South Korea are seeking to engage us bilaterally. So they also become acquiring parties. Also, we have what we call our service providers. So in terms of service providers, we have entities that will help you develop your project development documents. And also we have people that will help you do the financial analysis of your project. One other key actors that we have in there are the what we call the validation and verification bodies. These are auditing firms that would either validate or verify your project. And I must also add that in Africa there is no VVB or VVE in Africa.
What does that mean? VVB and
oh, sorry, that is a validation and verification body.
For the purposes of education.
Okay. So those are the.
So, moving forward, talk of carbon offset projects. Could you share some real life examples of successful carbon offset projects and how they have made a positive impact? Okay. So the first one I want to talk about is one that is currently under implementation, and that is a project by a company called EnviroFit. And then Act Commodities. So EnviroFit is seeking to introduce efficient cooking stoves to smallholder farmers. And anytime I talk about this, I get emotional because we went back into the community to assess the use of the stove. And a woman just told me that, look, Daniel, I'm able to save 2 cedis out of what I would have used to buy charcoal to cook. Right, and that 2 cedis means a lot to me and my family. And she pulled out a cloth and then wiped her eyes, and that was very emotional and touching to us. Right, and another thing I want to talk about is a project that is being developed by Jospon Group of Companies. They intend to develop a lot of integrated recycling plants where they want to recover organic fractions of our waste and then convert it to compost to support agriculture and again also avoid or improve health. All these are happening in Ghana.
All these are happening in Ghana. I must also add that currently there are about 34 projects under development, and they are all at various stages. And I would advise that you visit the website of the Carbon Market Office of Ghana. That's cmo.epa.gov.gh, and on the website you find a lot of information about the projects that are under development.
So, on the other hand, we know that there's a lot of skepticism in, some countries about the carbon system, arguing that the only safe way to cut climate gas emissions is to cut down on the emission at home. So what would you say about that?
Okay, so
from your perspective.
Thank you. That's quite interesting. Anyway, so for our perspective, we understand that emission reduction, no matter where it happens, right, is transboundary, because climate change is not limited to any geographic area. But however, in driving or in helping reduce emissions, it must be done at a lower cost, right? So how do you do that? So certain areas would offer bigger potentials at different or at cheaper rates, and so therefore I must say I will also indicate that no matter where it happens, it represents real reduction for the world. So we should look at investing in areas where it's cheaper to achieve higher emission reduction potentials.
So the carbon markets, we have, developed countries, developing countries, everyone involved. So how does the carbon market ensure fairness and equity, especially for developing countries and marginalized communities?
Oh, that's a difficult one.
Really?
Yeah, because we're still trying to negotiate around equity, around fairness and all of that. But I also add that to be able to address issues around equity and fairness, the country or the government must have in place a robust infrastructure, a robust legal regime to provide that confidence and to protect communities. So, for example, what's happening in Ghana is that before you can implement any project, the government of Ghana would have to evaluate the project and ensure that there are no net harm in the communities where you intend to develop the project. And indeed, the project should really represent sustainable development benefits for the communities. Thank you.
Wow.
Okay, that sounds very interesting. That's a lot to take in. We want to come down to Ghana, right? We want to talk about what the EPA has been doing with regards to the carbon markets and carbon credits and everything. What has been the progress so far since the beginning?
Okay, thank you, Kevin. So let me take you back again. As I said, Government of Ghana put forward its nationally determined contributions November 2021.
Okay.
And it had, as part of the implementation of the NDC programs, we are looking at implementing about 34 programs that are likely to cut Ghana's emissions or reduce Ghana's emissions from the projected 100 million tons to 36 million tons by achieving an emission reduction potential of 64 million tons. So let me go back because a lot of figures here. So in 2019, our assessment in terms of Ghana's emissions stood at approximately 60 million tons.
Okay.
And our estimations are that by 2030, it is likely to rise to 100 million tons. Right.
Wow.
So how do we prevent the 100 million tons? So we intend to implement 34 mitigation programs. If I say mitigation programs, they are programs that reduce, avoid, or remove greenhouse gas from the atmosphere. And so these programs will result or will help achieve 64 million tons emission reduction. Right. And the programs are structured in two. We have conditional and unconditional. Just as the name suggests, unconditional meaning that the government of Ghana is willing to lead in the mobilization of funds to implement 9 of them, right? And the conditional ones are those programs that only government of Ghana, are those programs that the government of Ghana can only achieve them with private sector or international finance. So on the back of that, government of Ghana identified Article 6 as one of the strategies to achieve the NDCs. And on the basis of that, we came up with the framework to govern our engagement in the market. And the framework provides the eligibility requirements, provides the policy context, the technical requirements, the fee structure for creating carbon assets in Ghana. And on the back of that, we are engaged with, as I said, with the government of Sweden, government of Singapore, government of South Korea, government of Liechtenstein, and other private sector entities to create assets in Ghana for transfer. And these assets, when transferred, will also result in investment being sent to Ghana. Yeah, so and that's one of the key ways that we are trying to raise the opportunities for the private sector.
Okay, so for the targets, the emission reduction targets, is there any timeline or any deadline you have in mind?
Okay, thank you for that question, Kevin. I missed that out. Yeah. So in terms of implementing the NDCs cover a 10-year period from 2020 to 2030.
Okay.
And it's up, or you can review it at 2025 to assess the implementations, take some of the actions out or add more actions. But in terms of our implementation, we are looking at achieving them by 2030. And I can say that we are doing very well in terms of meeting our commitments and our targets.
Is it progressing positively so far?
Yes.
Okay.
The reason why I say that is on the back of the publication of that framework agreement, the framework for the carbon markets, that has provided the needed attention on Ghana, right? So anywhere you go and you say you have an asset or you want to engage in the carbon market, they say they want to come to Ghana. And so we are struggling to actually meet the demand for assets in Ghana. So that's how come we have also put up a call on our website asking all those project developers that have green business ideas to approach us. We're happy to do some hands-holding and do some matchmaking.
But have there been any challenges? Have you faced any difficult challenges so far in trying to mitigate the reduction of emissions?
Yes, okay. Thank you. One of the challenges has to do with capacity, right? As I said, even if you take a look at the VVEs or the auditing firms, there's none in Africa, right? They all come from India and then beyond Africa. But what we have done is to innovatively indicate in the framework that no auditing entity can perform any function in Ghana without using a local Ghanaian expert. And so over time, we are happy to develop that expertise in country and have our own VVB or auditing entity that can really provide a service not only in Ghana but in Africa. Again, in terms of the challenges, we are looking at managing expectations, right? Managing expectation is one of the major issues around it. People hear carbon market and they feel that it's free money, let's go get it. So how do you manage those expectations, right? And so sometimes they may put forward the green business ideas. When you assess them in terms of the viability and all of that, it may not be really viable. And those are some of the challenges that we are actively addressing.
Okay. So, Kevin, even before you come in, you made mention that government, has put together some projects. Is it 34 projects, mitigation measures? Can you tell us a few? Is the Green Ghana Day part?
Okay, so that's a huge question. So in terms of the 34 programs of actions, right? They look at, as I said, achieving an emission reduction potential of 64 million tons. But the programs include improved cooks or clean cooking.
Okay.
They include conversion of organic waste to compost. They look at or scaling up our compost capacity. They look at e-mobility. They look at even one of the nicest one in there for me is the overage renewal vehicle policy in Ghana, where when you import a vehicle that's more than 10 years, you pay additional tax on it or additional penalty on it to really disincentivize you to really import those vehicles. So those are some of the programs. Again, addressing your question, the Green Ghana Day also is not really part of the programs, but in terms of that, it is helping also to really sequester carbon from the atmosphere. And as I said, you could use a nature-based solution to really address issues around emission reductions. And that's one of the ways to do that. Thank you.
Okay, so in the grand scheme of things, the whole idea behind this is to try and reduce the effects of climate change, combat climate change, right? So my question is, how much does carbon markets influence our fight against climate change?
Okay, thank you. So carbon markets presents real opportunity for not only governments but for the entire world to really address climate change. And how are we seeking to do that? As I said, we all have commitments or the NDCs. And how do we achieve that? Carbon revenues are one of the key ways to really achieve low carbon transition and low carbon development. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
So again, there's this, when you were talking about carbon market, this question came to mind. Don't you think it gives people the right to pollute? And then, well, if I can afford it, then I'll continue to pollute, and then I pay the fine. How about that? What would you say about that?
Okay, thank you. Note that even though you may have or you may be under a certain obligation, you cannot only just buy credit, but you must also have an inherent system to cut your own emissions. So it does not only look at just buying assets or buying credit to offset your emissions, but you must have a system to really reduce your internal emissions, and that is to address your question. Thank you.
So shifting gears a bit, how can everyday individuals contribute to carbon markets and support the cause of combating climate change?
Thank you. And that's where I go back to the issues around, if you have any green business ideas, just approach us. We're happy to help you. It's a public service. We are paid to do that. So we are excited to also welcome any individual who has any green business idea or has any innovative idea to help reduce, avoid, and also remove emissions from the atmosphere.
So those are the opportunities for individuals who want to get involved.
Yeah. And
they are going to get the support of EPA. I take it EPA is a regulatory body for carbon markets here in Ghana. Am I right when I say that?
Yeah, you're right. So the Carbon Market Office, established under the framework, is hosted by the Environmental Protection Agency and under the Climate Change Unit. And so you're right.
Wow.
Okay. In wrapping up, we have a few minutes to go. How do you foresee carbon markets evolving in the future, especially considering the tech advancements and changing global policies?
Oh, great. So, Kevin, that's a so how do we see the carbon market? So, we see carbon markets as really providing the opportunities, right, that I think that we all lose sight of. So, people see climate change as only presenting costs, but inherent in climate change, inherent in the fight against climate change, are opportunities. And so how do we raise revenues to really support or drive our development priorities? And so we see carbon markets as really helping achieve that low carbon transition that we are all looking for. Thank you.
This has really been an enlightening discussion, very eye-opening. We've learned
Mm-hmm.
a lot today, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. And thank you so much, Daniel, for shedding light on the carbon market. It's been, well, as I said, eye-opening discussion. We hope this discussion has given our listeners a better understanding of the carbon market's significance in achieving our sustainable development goals. So please tune in same time next week as we continue discussions on all things sustainable development right here on Asaase Radio 99.5 so that people and the planet can prosper. If you have any topic you want us to discuss, please share with us and shoot an email to sdghub@cestint.org. Remember, dear listeners, the future is in our hands and it's our responsibility to ensure a healthier planet for generations to come. Keep raising your voices, keep advocating for change, and keep tuning in to the SDG Hub for more insightful conversations. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay eco-conscious.
Thank you, Rose, and thank you very much for staying with us on the SDG Hub. We have been speaking with Daniel Akwetey Lamptey. He's the Principal Program Officer at the Climate Change Unit of the Environmental Protection Agency. I've been your host, Kevin Annan, and I did this with my co-host,
Rosemary Balami.
Okay, we go back to Beatrice.